So this is our class 3 of 4 classes for the Real Food Challenge. And so next week we're on day 14. By next Thursday, that'll be day 21. That'll be our last day of this challenge. But we're going to have a class, get together, and kind of see how everybody's doing, and talk about what we do to move forward. And then we'll also talk about things that we haven't quite had time to discuss yet. But we're going to recap what we talked about last week. So we started talking about farming practices and what it means to be organic versus conventional farming. So organic means that they're not going to use GMO, genetically modified seeds. They're going to rotate crops, so they're not always planting the same thing in the same field every time. They use different types of what's called biopesticides to be able to manage weeds and to be able to manage bugs, sort of thing. And then they use organic matter for fertilizer. Whereas conventional farming, they use more synthetic products to spray on the plants and to manage the weeds. They typically will do what's called a monocrop, where they're going to plant just one crop in a field all the time, which will deplete the nutrients in that field because the plant uses certain nutrients to grow, and so it's going to pull all those nutrients out of the ground. And if the dirt isn't being replenished with those nutrients, then it makes for a very weak plant, and the plant is not able to sustain its life as well, so it's more susceptible to get attacked by different funguses and insects and that sort of thing. So it's really generally, oftentimes, organic farm is going to be a small local farm, whereas our bigger farms are going to be the conventional farms. So what does it mean whenever you have organic food? If it's something like fruit, a vegetable, a bean, a nut, a grain, what that means is that the plant hasn't been sprayed with any synthetic fertilizers or chemicals on it. If it's something like a meat, like any kind of organic chicken, organic beef, eggs, what that means is that the animal was not fed anything that was not organic. So it doesn't have anything to do about where the animal lives necessarily. So if we have a chicken that's considered an organic chicken, then it means that all of the feed that went into that organic chicken was organic, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the chicken was outside roaming around in the pasture. So you really have to, it's almost kind of semantics where you're saying, well, is it pastured or is it organic? Organic just has to do with the spray that goes onto the food. Okay, we talked about rules for conquering cravings. Number 1 was to eat before you get ravenous. And we talked about this hunger scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is ravenous and 10 is absolutely stuffed. And we really want to start eating or start kind of planning our meal when we get to about that 2 or 3, where we're hungry, but we're not just so ravenous that we would eat anything that's put in front of us. To deal with conquer cravings, oddly enough, there is more and more research coming out that we need to sleep. And we're kind of living in a world where it's just go, 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 get as much done as you can. The longer your to-do list is, the more accomplished you can be. But we really do need to take some time and actually sleep. And there's a whole list of what's called sleep hygiene, meaning some of the things that you have to do to really prepare your body for sleeping, such as making sure that your room is in a very dark room, make sure that you're not watching or looking at any kind of computer screens before you go to sleep, because it affects your serotonin, your melatonin levels, making sure that you are preparing and kind of allowing your body to slow down whenever it's time to go to sleep. Then number 3 for dealing with cravings is to deal with stress. And there's a huge connection between stress and what happens with stress is it increases your cortisol, which is your stress hormone. And when your cortisol is raised, it makes you crave more sugar. And that's the scientific cycle that happens. So the more sugar we eat, the more sugar we want. So dealing with stress and really getting it to the root of what the issue is, as far as stress goes, is going to be helpful for decreasing your sugar cravings. Have fun. This is something that we tend to forget. Sometimes, I know as a working mother, sometimes if I go out with my girlfriends and we have fun, there's a guilt there. We feel like, there's so many other things I should be doing. My house is filthy. I need to cook. I do all these other things. But having fun is kind of a prescription that never gets written, that we really do need to incorporate fun in our life. Always eating breakfast. Lots and lots of information shows that people who eat breakfast usually weigh less. They usually have better blood sugar balance throughout the day. So breakfast is really, really important. And then create meal balance. And that's what we spend a lot of time talking about. Meal balance meaning our macronutrients. And our macronutrients, macronutrients are the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And we talked a lot about last week. We got together and had groups of putting together particular meals that incorporated all the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Every snack and meal should have balance. And the reason for this is that it aids in blood sugar balance. All right, so let's talk about the fun stuff. What kind of good things are going on? What kind of celebrations do we have? Anybody have anything that they want to share? I know somebody wore a pair of pants that they hadn't worn in a long time.
We took a trip out to go to a forums.
Okay, so you said that was the first time you've been there?
First time.
Okay.
Lots of people. Well, it's all limited because it's winter, but the winter stock. But they had chicken, frozen chickens, they had milk, they had beef, duck, carcasses to make stock.
To make broth.
Yeah, meat. It's interesting.
Good.
I bought a few things.
Good.
Yeah.
You watched Food Inc?
Yes.
Yeah, Judy said she watched that too.
Wow. Yeah.
Is that the first time you've seen it?
I saw it once before years ago.
Okay. What'd you think?
Pretty disgusting.
Pretty disgusting, okay. So if you have, has anybody watched any of the other movies that we talked about originally? The list of movies, I would recommend that you put one on and can be just some background noise if you need it, something to watch. Any other celebrations?
4 pounds less.
4 pounds less, and it's only 4 though. She has another celebration. I forgot. The thing that you're not creating anymore. Ice cream.
Oh,
She's gotten over her ice cream craving.
And really, for the most part, sugars. Really, like, yeah. And I saw Theo peanut butter, like those Reese's peanut butter cups. They were Theo, and they were Whole Foods. And I was still, no, I didn't, but I saw them there. There was another Theo product you had mentioned.
The chocolate. That they're usually a pretty good brand for chocolate.
Yeah, so it's really a very good thing.
Well, I think the ice cream, getting over the ice cream craving, that's pretty exceptional.
Yeah, it really
It's
is.
pretty exceptional.
say that.
Anybody else have celebrations? Anybody sleeping better, feeling better?
I was gonna say just not feeling as, not that I ever felt really swollen, you know, but just feeling like everything feels better, just more vibrant in general in the morning. I
Okay.
think it definitely, not that I was ever really going to sleepyhead, but that part. And then donuts rolled by in front of me this morning. Like things have been rolling by that it's not, I guess I'm far enough along, we're far enough along into the challenge and it's like, oh no, that's not worth it. Like if I'm gonna splurge on something, it's gonna be something better for me. So I'm hoping that can stick with me
Good.
after.
Good, good. Anybody have any concerns? Anything that they're like weren't expecting that they're concerned about? All right.
Well, I have to say, I'm really not a cook. I'm just really not. So, there's not really a lot of variety. In the past, I've always liked just steamed broccoli, or tonight I made baked sweet potatoes, and I made an ambrosia kind of thing, fruit salad, without all the maraschino cherries juice and marshmallows and all that. Yeah, that's yummy. Oh, and I brought lemons from our garden and satsumas from our next door neighbor's garden. So mine was lemon, but
So you're not having a lot of variety? Is that the challenge?
yeah, it's like an all-day thing to figure out. It's beyond my planning capabilities at this moment.
Okay.
I hate to admit that.
Well, so I think maybe you're the only one saying it, but levels, it's challenged. So to stick with this for 21 days, I think is very doable. And then we'll start next week, we'll talk about, so now what do we do from here? So how do we start to implement other foods? And so we'll kind of get a little bit more into that conversation, and then we'll talk about the meal prep next week also, and how to kind of get used to planning things and that sort of thing. I'll tell y'all that this is my life, this is what I do, and it's still a challenge for me. It gets much easier, but it's not ever to a point where I feel like, oh, I don't have to think about it, I don't have to do anything. It's part of what we do. So it's kind of like your checkbook, where you wouldn't just go spend whatever money, oh, I want this and I want this, and I'm just going to spend all this money and not think about the repercussions of it. So with food, it's the same way, that there is always going to be a consequence. We don't always know exactly what that consequence is at the moment, but there's always some kind of consequences to how the food affects you. So you really have to approach it a little bit more gently and very carefully, and it's a process. And that's what we said in the very beginning, that changing the way that you eat is a very long journey. It doesn't happen in 21 days. This challenge was just to kind of hyper-focus on what's in our food supply, but it takes a long time to truly change the way you eat. And I understand that. So I'm not expecting anybody to be perfect. We just want to really kind of focus on everything for this time, and then we'll talk about what we're going to do next.
You just said something that it takes a long time to change what you eat, and where I'm discovering it takes a long time to change what I want to eat. And
Right,
I'm
that's a
like,
good point.
how that process, okay, I'm not in the position of forcing myself, but, what do I want to eat? And then you talk about the consequences, okay, I don't know, I'm breaking out into something. I'm trying to think, maybe I'm allergic to nuts, just like this bizarre thing, but, what, and I think I've talked to some other ladies too, who, we're not beating ourselves up about, for me at first it was had to be rigid, but so say la vie.
Well, and the reality is that, just like you had mentioned before, a carrot's never going to taste like an Oreo. It's just not. We can hope and we can pray, but it's just not going to. But I do think that there comes a time when the Oreo is much less enticing. And, the ice cream is much less enticing. Yes, it tastes good. When you put it in your mouth, it's like, oh, wow, this is really good. But it's much less enticing. You don't really want it or crave it as much as you once did. And that's part of the journey, is that you change things and you taste and you start understanding what the taste of real food is like, so that whenever you have something that isn't what could be considered real food, that's very, very altered, it doesn't taste as good as it used to. And you will get to that point.
What I noticed too is that mentally, because the Real Food Challenge has prompted me to be more aware of what's in the food. And I always knew it, right? I've known to read the labels for years, but this challenge has really hyper-focused on me. I want to stay away from the consequences of eating preservatives and, all those ingredients that we can't pronounce. And really, I'm stopping to think and wonder about what the hell is that? Even their product, and never mind.
I looked at my toothpaste today, compared it to hers. And I'm like, oh.
So it makes you think. Obviously we're not eating toothpaste, but you're putting it in your mouth, and it's kind of getting absorbed in some ways through the skin. You do swallow some of it. I'd say the same thing for the things that you put on your skin. Your skin is one of the biggest organs in your body, and it's going to absorb things very quickly. I used to think, well, if I'm going to shave my legs, I'll put the shaving cream on, but I'll just put it on a little spot and I'll shave it real quick so that way it doesn't get absorbed in. But it takes like 3 seconds for chemicals to get absorbed through the skin. So I can't shave quite that fast. So I had to change to something else. But anything that you're putting, what's that?
You just don't shave anymore.
Well, it is winter, I'm wearing long pants, so you never know. So you just, it really, the challenge, the purpose of this challenge is to make you look into what you're doing. And so it's obviously food is part of it, that's what we're focusing on. But anything that you're coming in contact with, the air that you breathe. My friend was telling me that she was stripping some cabinets the other day, and there has 65 to 80 degrees, I think she said. So she had to be in the garage with the door closed and a little door open, the garage door closed and just a small door open. And she said the next day she was breaking out around her face. So that's not, she wasn't obviously putting it on her face, but just from what she was inhaling has affected her in such a short period of time. So when you start paying attention to these things, you'll recognize that we're not in a world that's supporting our health, and so we have to really take it upon us to make that work and to make that happen. And it's a journey, it doesn't happen overnight, it does take a long time.
I had some company today. She actually comes usually every Thursday to do Friday stuff. And she always brings something to eat. She cooks everything. But I thought about, you know, when she brings soup. Usually she makes different kinds of soup. She's from Costa Rica or somewhere, I forget where. But she's a fabulous cook. And, you know, I wondered where she made chowder. That's got potatoes and she told me she put soy in it instead of milk. And I thought, and there were a couple of things, and I didn't have the heart to tell her, you know, I'm not gonna eat that, or I can't, I don't wanna say I can't eat it.
Right.
And, she's very proud when she brings something, it's because she wants to share. So, any suggestions on that?
Well, I would say, I would use that as a catalyst to start a conversation. Like, oh, really, why'd you put soy in there instead of milk? And just kind of get the conversation going. Not necessarily that you're not going to eat it. If you're in a group of people, you might be able to get away with not kind of sliding by and not having something to eat. But when it's just you and one other person,
She feels she's teaching me something, and that's been, she knows her. It's a big focus, so
Right.
when she cooks and she brings it, and she tells me what she's done and where she's gotten it, and, it's good information, but to have a discussion with her like that will not work with her. And I even wanted to cook today, and she said, well, I already made that, and okay, all right. But, so that's a challenge for me.
Yeah.
I just don't know what to do.
And you don't want to be rude.
Yeah.
Especially one-on-one, I mean, you know,
Yeah.
that's.
right. Well, and like I said, I would try and just use it as a little bit of a catalyst just to plant a seed. Like really, well, you know, I've heard that soy, have you heard anything about soy? I heard soy's not that great for you. The last I've read, soy's not that good for you. And then you don't have to, you can just kind of move on from there and let her just plant that seed and let her kind of do what she wants to do with it.
Could you say, oh, I saw no soy for, no. But, I would think, like Mary, you saw Food Inc.
Yeah.
Or, and then of course you would have to see the movie. You cannot tell a lie. But.
That would be another good little catalyst if there's, she read an
Yes.
article or,
Right, I was gonna say
just
that.
to question and say, I've heard that that's not that as good as we have been told it is, or, what do you think about it? But you don't have to get into a full-blown conversation where you're trying to convince somebody of something that they don't believe. Plant the seed, and then the way that the universe works is that you plant that seed, and then she's going to go to the next person somewhere, and they're going to say something negative about soy, and she may have never heard it the first time originally, but since you've already planted that seed, it's going to grow. And that's how we kind of change our minds about things, is that you hear something that may be questionable, and then you continue to hear that over and over again until you start to look into it and make your own decision.
And I was going to say with soy in particular, I mean, it was not long ago that I really thought, I mean, I had it. I had the soybeans, the edamame, and when the kids, we would all come in after school, it was better than a bag of chips, it was better than cookies, it was better than, it's like, okay, well, this is the snack I'm going to give them before dinner, is in an hour and a half to not ruin. I mean, and I had no idea. So sometimes I think that's been the hardest part, or not the hardest part, but you have people really making good attempts. They're like, oh, there's no fat in it.
Right.
Let me give this to you. So it's their lack of knowledge. So they have a good heart, and so they might be more open to it than you.
Well, the reason she uses soy is because her grandson didn't drink milk.
He's a young one.
He's 22 years old, and she's still,
She's stuck on that soy.
yeah. Anyway, that's just, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So
really enjoyed not having it there because it's very cumbersome for me to have to fit that into my life, you know? But I think we need another class that talks about how to successfully navigate a restaurant.
Okay,
You know, how to pick a restaurant and then, how to be successful.
okay.
Because like this year, I was successful in not eating any no-no foods over Thanksgiving. The way I did that is I stayed home, I didn't see anyone.
I was gonna congratulate you on that, but I'm not sure.
It's okay, but that's
No,
not,
but you're not being realistic.
that's not good, I mean, that's not healthy either.
Right, that's not
That's
something
not
that
fun,
you should do
yeah.
forever. And that does take the fun out of the holidays for sure. Okay, we'll talk about that next time. We'll talk about meal planning. There was some other things. Meal planning, restaurant eating. There was some more. It'll come to me. So that'll be our topics for next time. But today, we're going to talk about inflammation and the two biggest things that cause inflammation as far as what we eat. We'll talk about how to detoxify the body, and then we'll talk about nutrient-dense foods. What kinds of foods have the most nutrient density? So inflammation, the definition of inflammation is a localized physical condition in which part of the body becomes reddened, swollen, hot, often painful, but not always painful. And that's very important to remember. And it's a reaction to an injury or infection. So if I walk up to this table and I kick it, and I don't have shoes on and I hurt my toe, it's going to get inflamed. And that's part of the inflammation, the healing process, is that it gets inflamed, it gets red, usually it'll get warm. But where it becomes a challenge is when that inflammation is not in the toe, but it's in my GI tract. And there's always this real low level of inflammation that's going on. It doesn't ever, our immune system isn't able to get over that inflammation and to calm and cure that inflammation. So one of the biggest things that causes inflammation is sugar. So I'm going to draw you all a little thing here. I'm a diabetes educator, so I talk a lot about sugar and blood sugar and how it affects the body. So this is my illustration. Okay. This is your blood vessel here. And not exactly to scale, but this is your liver up here, like this. And then we have your pancreas down here. And then this is your body cell. So when we eat something that has sugar, has everybody heard the term glucose? Glucose is just the fancy medical word for blood sugar. So when you eat something that has sugar or carbohydrates, both of them, what it does is it creates these molecules of glucose in the body. So our blood vessels like to have some glucose, but not a lot of glucose. A lot of glucose can cause problems. So it creates this glucose, and when it does that, it sends a signal to the pancreas, and it tells the pancreas, hey, we've got a lot more glucose than we're comfortable with. You need to do something about it. So the pancreas makes insulin, and it will squirt that insulin into the bloodstream. And one of the jobs of insulin is to attach to a body cell here, and whenever it does that, it opens up a door. So you can think of insulin as being like a key. When this door opens up, the glucose goes into the body cell. And this is what's supposed to happen, okay? Now what happens sometimes is whenever we're having a lot of sugar, so let's say we drink a soda, which I know nobody in here is drinking soda, but we could say let's drink a soda or something even that would be considered healthy like a Powerade or a Gatorade. Because we know soda has way too much sugar, but Gatorade has very similar amount. So we drink that and then we get all this sugar in the body. And so it starts to get in the cell, and the cell gets full of sugar. And then the next thing that happens is, after you've had that Gatorade, somebody comes in and they have a king cake. And you're like, oh my gosh, it's king cake. It's Mardi Gras season, how can I not have a piece? So you have a piece of king cake, and then what happens is that this body cell and to be able to move that the way it's supposed to go. But whenever we're constantly bombarding the body with sugar or with carbohydrates, and specifically more processed carbohydrates, it creates a chronic inflammation system in the body. So it's always having to fight, and there's always this extra insulin in there, and it doesn't really know how to handle it. So sugar is one of the most common causes of inflammation. It can be natural sugar like honey or maple syrup. It can be processed sugar like table sugar or powdered sugar. Or it can be artificial sugars, which don't create this exact process, but they still cause inflammation in the body. And so the next question is, well, what am I supposed to do? How do I get away with having sugar? And the reality is that no matter where you are, the amount of sugar that you eat needs to be decreased. Because in our world, we've got entirely too much sugar that's being thrown at us all the time. So it needs to be decreased. And you know, there are some ways to do it. We talked a little bit about sugar cravings last week. But being able to decrease the sugar may mean, for some people, either not having foods that we would put sugar on. So if you eat pancakes, we have pancakes every Saturday morning at our house. And we've had to do it like every other Saturday. Because in my mind, I can eat a pancake without syrup, but my 7-year-old has a hard time with that. And my adult son, husband, also has a hard time with that. So it may just mean that we need to decrease how frequently we're doing it, or decrease how often you bring these things in the house. You know, maybe the idea of having a box of cookies feels very rewarding, like, oh, I'm going to bring this, I'm going to buy this, I'm going to bring it to somebody, and we'll have it in the house just because whenever we want a cookie, we can have a cookie. But the reality is that the more it's there, the more you're going to want it, you know? Kind of like the king cake that's sitting, somebody brings in, it's sitting there, and the more it's there, the more you want it. So, sugar is one of the things we really have to get away from. This, I know you can't read this slide, but these are all the different ways that sugar can be indicated on ingredient list. So there's, I think, like 45 ways here. It can be everything from sugar to agave to sorghum syrup to barley malt. It can be lactose, dextrose, all these different ways to say sugar. So what the manufacturers do sometimes is they'll take 3 or 4 different kinds of sugar, and on a label, because the thing that there is the heaviest weight on an ingredient label has to be labeled first. So they'll take it, if there's a lot of sugar in something, they'll take that and say, well, it's not all sugar. Some of it's dextrose, and some of it's corn syrup, and some of it's maple syrup, and they'll break it up into different ingredients so that it can be lower on the ingredient list. So it's important to know where anything that ends in OSE, you can bet is a sugar, and anything that has syrup at the end of it. It's barley malt syrup, high fructose corn syrup, maple syrup, brown rice syrup. All of those syrups, you can bet those are sugars. So sometimes, if you start looking on the label, you may be able to identify 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 different kinds of sugar in one food. And so that's an indication that it's probably something that you should put back on the shelf and walk away from.
Is sugar also a preservative?
It can be, yes. It can be a
So
preservative.
it can help extend the life of food.
It can. There are lots of different kinds of preservatives. Usually if something has sugar in it, it's more for the flavor, because there are so many other ways to preserve a food. Unless it's something that's done, you know, in an in-home kitchen where like we'll make preserves, like big preserves or something like that, and put the sugar in to preserve it. But if it's something that's going to be store-bought, there are lots of different types of preservatives that you can have. So usually sugar is because of the flavor. And the more sugar you eat, the more sugar you want to eat. It becomes a vicious cycle. That the more you're having, the more frequently you want it. All right, our other inflammatory food is fat. And fats, we talked about fat last week. Not all fats are created equal. We have fats that are supportive of our body, and then fats that are causing inflammation. And the ones that are causing inflammation are the ones that are vegetable oil, which is just kind of a, you know, when I was in school and we talked about vegetable oil, I would get very frustrated because on one hand, we're telling people, eat vegetables, they don't have any fat in them. Eat vegetables, eat vegetables, eat vegetables. And then on the other hand, we're telling them that vegetable oil is pure fat. obviously, if you're having something that is creating inflammation, the first thing you have to do is take that out. So it's like sitting on a tack. I've heard the description. If I'm sitting on a tack, I'm sitting in this chair, there are 2 tacks here, and I'm sitting here, the only thing I can do to make that pain go away is to get off of it. I can move it around, I can scoot it around, I can maybe take one out, but if there's still a tack there, it's still going to cause pain. So the only thing you have to do, one of the things you have to do for inflammation is to take the inflammatory thing out and start getting rid of that. The other things, there are foods certainly that you can start eating that have anti-inflammatory processes. So things like omega-3 fats, which are going to be found in walnuts, and you have a handout that has all this stuff on there. Found in walnuts, some of your fatty fish like salmon, tuna is a good fat, chia seeds are a good omega-3, cod, sardines. Do you have any sardine lovers in here? Okay. Anchovies? Anchovies. Berries are very good, all the different types of berries, so strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries. Extra virgin olive oil. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so, when you eat these things, what's happening in that time? Like,
Okay.
release?
Well, let's see. On this list, the only thing that really has carbohydrates in it are the berries. And berries are very low in they have carbs in them, but they're very low in the amount of carbs that they have. So this process is really, it's not producing as much glucose. So you're really not producing much insulin in that
It's
either.
not like when you eat, say you eat something sugary and then you follow it with like something like this. It isn't like, oh, this is going through the bloodstream. Oh, look, here's some virus coming through right behind. We're gonna, too hard, we're gonna neutralize each other out. It's
No,
not
because
like
whenever
that.
you eat that first thing that has the sugar in it, it's like you're still sitting on the tack. So it's still causing you to inflame.
So this is not going to decrease inflammation at the time that you have high inflammation.
I'm thinking of it more like a fire. It's kind of what you're describing. Like if you have coals and it's really hot, and then you pour water on it, that's going to decrease the heat of the fire. It's not. It does work like that a little bit, but you're still. Our bodies are always in constant, slight chronic inflammation. So every time you're putting something on there that's going to become more inflammatory, then you would need extra anti-inflammatory to make it go away. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay. I had kind of researched like the whole yeast thing for a while, and the lady's like, everyone has yeast, you don't get rid of it, you just decrease yeast. And
Right.
yeast is fed by sugar and all these things, and that increases your yeast levels and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like in my brain made sense. I'm like, oh, so I'm not eliminating yeast from my body. Yeast is just an element that's needed in my body.
Right.
I'm just decreasing the level so it's not out of balance and it's not caught triggering these reactions in my body. Like for me, it was my skin that caused me to have breakouts and stuff. So like once I brought it down to that level,
So with yeast, I think of yeast as being like a bully on a playground. So whenever you have yeast, you can go into any playground that has kids, and there's going to be one kid that thinks that they're a little tougher than the others, and he can kind of push the other ones around, and that's kind of what yeast is like. That's on every playground, but if you get a bunch of those bullies in one playground, they're going to kind of take over, and they're going to start fights and that sort of thing. But that's kind of what the yeast does. So we can remove that and all of those bullies and have just one or two in there, and everybody can play along just fine. But once you start getting a lot of it together, then it becomes more of a problem.
I guess I don't know if this is or not. That diagram over there is about
Sugar.
sugar and insulin. Is that also about inflammation?
Yes, because the more sugar you have, the more insulin your body produces, and the more insulin your body produces, the more inflamed you're going to become. So insulin is inflammatory.
And honey is not our friend there.
Honey is going to cause an insulin response. So honey is better than Splenda, it's better than rather than getting over-focused on those, focus more on the foods that we want to increase. So we want to increase salmon, we want to increase things like green tea, we want to start using turmeric, we want to start using cinnamon. So how are we going to incorporate those into our diet rather than focusing on how am I going to stop eating sugar? Incorporate the foods that are supportive of you first. All right. Any questions about inflammation?
No, but just before I came here on the internet or Facebook somewhere, it was real clear about how inflammation has become, I'm going to use the word rampant, but that it's like this curse on our whole society.
Right.
So
Inflammation is
You know,
the cause, it's the root of every disease. It's the root of every disease process, chronic disease process that's out there, starts with inflammation. And I think that the medical community is just understanding that. So I don't know, it has gotten worse over the years, but I think that our understanding of where chronic disease comes from, being inflammation, is more, we're understanding that more now, that everything starts with inflammation. Everything from cancer to diabetes to arthritis to all of the different autoimmune diseases, it all starts with inflammation. So there will be
and
much more talk about
every
inflammation.
checkup.
Yes. So on one hand, we have the food industry that's just wanting to make a pretty diet. On the other hand, we have the health industry that's kind of saying, you know, what they're doing is not very good for us. But what I can assure you, and I've seen this in the past 4 or 5 years, the food industry is they're gonna make money no matter what. So they're gonna change what they're doing, because if we stop buying sugar and we stop buying sodas and we stop buying all that stuff, they're gonna make changes and start producing the foods that we want.
They already are.
They are. They absolutely are. So I saw, I guess within the past month or two, that Campbell's is now producing all of their soups without genetically modified foods. Which, not to say that Campbell's is a healthy company, but they're making changes because they're hearing what we're saying. So you vote with your dollar. Every single time that you spend money on food, you're telling the food industry, this is what I want more of. This is what I want more of. And so whenever you're telling them that, this is what I want more of, that's what they're going to produce. So if it's a healthy food or something that's supportive, then that's what they're going to make more of. And if it's something that's going to tear your body down, that's what they're going to make more of. So you just remember that every time you buy something, buy food, that you're telling the food industry, this is what I want you to make more of for me and my family. So, all right, we're going to move on so that we can get through all this tonight. I get asked a lot if a food is healthy. And I had a conversation with a family member this weekend, and I felt like I was on trial. Like, is it healthy? Is it healthy? Is it healthy? And I was kind of dodging all these things. So, what I can tell you is that rather than thinking about foods being healthy or not healthy, because foods can be healthy for one person and not healthy for another person. So, for instance, if I have I have an autoimmune disease. I have Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So dairy, some people would say is considered healthy. For me, it's not healthy. It does things to me that I don't need to do. It causes inflammation for me. So I don't eat dairy. That doesn't mean that I don't give my son dairy because he doesn't have any issues. So it might be healthy for him. But to say that dairy is a healthy food, it's not really, it's kind of hard to say that across the board for certain foods. So what I prefer you to think of it as, is it nutrient dense? Does it have nutrients that are going to support the body? And so it's a little bit, it's almost semantics, but it really means something different. Nutrient dense means that there are a lot of nutrients in a small amount of food. Whereas healthy just kind of has this very vague meaning that nobody really knows exactly what that means. All right, so we're going to go through a series of nutrient-dense foods, and you have a handout in all of your stuff. Nutrient-dense broths and stocks. Does anybody here cook with broth and stock? All right, so I can tell you that probably, I don't know, maybe 8, 10 years ago, if somebody told me that I needed to cook with broth, that I needed to make my own broth, I'd be like, would they sell it with that bone are going to go into your body and they're going to build you up. So broths are great to use for, sipping it. You can drink a broth like if you were drinking coffee. Obviously things like soups and stews. If you're going to cook a grain, so if you're going to cook rice and you cook it with broth, it gets those nutrients into the rice. Any other ways that people use broth? What's that? Gumbo. Okay, so like a soup.
I use it to saute.
Saute. Okay, yeah, to make little gravies. That would be good to saute some vegetables. That's great.
Vegetables and then it makes like a soup from vegetables.
Well, I mean, I put my mustard greens in it. It made it really good. So if you just wanted to eat your mustard greens in whole, but then
You could add more broth to it.
yeah.
I used to do a class that I called the Get Real Food, not Real Food Challenge, Let's Get Real Food, and we would taste all different kinds of broth. So organic broths versus the canned broth versus homemade broth. And if you ever have the opportunity to do that, the taste between them is very, very different. And obviously the one that's been cooking for a long time, you can feel the energy that somebody poured into it to make it is much better. Eggs? Yes.
Is this a new handout that we got tonight, or is it?
Y'all might not have gotten it, don't you? The more gelatinous your broth is, meaning when you pull it out of the refrigerator, if it jiggles like Jell-O, that's what you want. That gives you a lot of the nutrients, and there are certain amino acids that are in that gelatin that you don't get from many other places. So we used to think, oh, if I pull it out and it's jiggling, that's a lot of fat in there. But really, what it really is those the collagen that's in that broth. All right, so eggs. Eggs have gone back and forth over the decades of it's healthy, it's not healthy, eat them, don't eat them, all that stuff. But what we know about eggs is that the white part of an egg is pure protein, and it's the purest protein you can find. The yellow part of the egg is where all the nutrients are, except that protein. So all of the nutrients are going to be found in the yolk of the egg, including cholesterol, which is a good kind of cholesterol. It's not the same cholesterol that is in our bloodstream that causes elevated cholesterol in the blood. So two different kinds of cholesterol. But also with eggs, the animal that has been, so whether it's a chicken or Miss Linda was saying she bought some duck eggs at the farmer's market, the animal that's been out in the pasture and that has gotten more sunlight is going to have more nutrients in that egg yolk. And you can tell the difference. I have a picture. I don't know if I'll be able to bring it up quickly, but I have a picture of a store-bought egg versus an egg that we got. I think the egg was, I don't remember if it was from my chickens or from one of the farmers, but it's pale yellow versus bright orange. And the orange yolk is where all of those nutrients are found. And also vitamin D. So there's an epidemic that everybody is very low in vitamin D, and an egg that comes from a chicken that has been in the sun is going to have more vitamin D than an egg that has been from a chicken that's been raised in the light. What's that? A coop, yes. All right, fermented or cultured foods. I've been told that I should not say fermented because it sounds unpleasant, so we'll call it cultured. But cultured foods are foods that have beneficial bacteria that have been added to them for the purpose of allowing that bacteria to grow. So does anybody are familiar with fermented foods? So some of the common fermented foods would be things like sauerkraut or kimchi, which is like a Vietnamese type of sauerkraut. Things like kombucha is a fermented food. When we start really looking, there are some common fermented foods. Yogurt would be fermented, that's pretty common. But if you really start to dive in, you'll find things like miso, which is a fermented soy, which fermented soy is the only way that your body can process and utilize soy without causing issues. So there are lots of other types of fermented foods, but the reason GI tract. And also those little microbes, I was going to call them bugs, but that doesn't sound appetizing. Those little microbes are, they're working. And part of what they do is they make vitamins. So they make all of the B vitamins. So vitamin B, B1, B2, B6, B12, all those vitamins are being made by those microbes. And then they also make vitamin K, which is something that our bodies are getting mostly through the microbes in our gut. And vitamin A.
Just say what you just said.
Those little microbes are working to make all of the B vitamins, vitamin K, where most of the vitamin K that we get comes from the microbes in our large intestines. And then it makes vitamin A. So whenever you hear people talking about taking their probiotic, or they need to find a probiotic for them to take, this is essentially probiotic in the food form, where you're eating foods that are going to be probiotic, meaning they're going to repopulate your GI tract with those microbes. So this is a list of some fermented foods. So buttermilk is another one that's pretty common. A true sourdough bread, where the bread has been allowed to go through the full souring process, is an excellent fermented food. Some olives and pickles, not all of them, but some olives and pickles have microbes added to them so that they can allow the fermentation process to happen. So the next nutrient-dense food would be sea vegetables. Fermented wine. Good question. Wine, yes, it is fermented. It usually is fermented beyond the point that it's going to become beneficial for you. So, there are some benefits to drinking wine for some people. I wouldn't rely on wine as being my fermented food of choice to repopulate my gut. Yes, she told me to drink fermented foods. So yeah, wine is fermented, but it's fermented a little bit beyond the point of it being sweet. Okay, so sea vegetables are the basically seaweed that's grown in the sea. And those sea vegetables are very high in iodine, which are very nourishing for our thyroid. Yes, kelp, nori, dulse, kombu, those are all different types of seaweeds that you can actually find in stores. Anybody use seaweed? I meant to bring some, I forgot. I saw, if you go to, if you eat sushi, the little roll, the wrap that they use, that's a seaweed. And I can't remember exactly which one it is. But I've also seen people use, it comes in a sheet, so they're about this wide, very, very thin, very paper-like, and I've seen people put a little bit of water on one side and roll it up and make like a cone out of it, and then you can stuff the inside of it and make it kind of like a burrito. The way that I mostly use seaweed is I'll put it in something that I'm cooking, like a soup or a stew or a pot of beans. I'll put it in there, and then it will extract all the nutrients. It's so thin that it really kind of falls apart. And so the way that I usually do it is I'll put it in a metal tea strainer, and then I'll put the whole thing in there, and then whenever I'm ready to take it out, I'll pull out the metal tea strainer. So it gets all the nutrients, but it doesn't have the seaweed stuff in it. So if it does, there's nothing wrong with eating it. My family doesn't like it. They don't like to see little black pieces of things floating around in their white meat. So that's the way that I've gotten around doing it. Leafy green vegetables. So we know that our leafy green vegetables are very good for us. And this time of the year is really the time when we're going to get most of our leafy green vegetables. So things like kale and Swiss chard and bok choy and broccoli, although it's not leafy, it's still a green vegetable. So these are all very good for helping the body to detoxify itself, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. I'd say liver is probably the most common. If the animal that they're coming from is an animal that has been out in pasture, it's been doing what an animal is supposed to do, and it hasn't been altered in any way, then the liver is what's going to be the filter. It really kind of cleans out the blood of an animal, and so whenever we need it, we get all of the nutrients that go along with it. So, I would say the same thing. All of the organs that come from an animal are very nutrient dense, so you don't need to eat a lot of it, but we do need to eat them on a regular basis. So for the organ eaters in here, what kind of ways do you like to eat it? Let's say liver. You just, how do you cook it?
I don't cook it, I eat it at a restaurant.
Okay, okay. So,
But I did learn, if you, when you cook it at home, don't use salt with it, it dries it out. You do that.
Yeah.
Add the salt.
And the other food is kind of good.
yeah, if you're cooking it,
Half
it's
of
not
it's the
proper.
best.
Calf liver,
Yeah.
tongue,
Has to be cooked a long, long
tongue.
Oh,
I would say
rice dressing, like my grandmother used to put all kind of vegetables, I put everywhere in there. Yeah.
Usually liver, heart, kidney, those kind of things are all in rice dressing.
I bought a bag Saturday at the farmer's market. Well, you know, you do one? He said, it's got parts in it. I said, I'll take it. But I love the pate and stuff that, that's a pan fry.
And fried liver. So in your handout, you have your recipes. One of the recipes that you have is I call it beef and liver pate. It's just something that I've kind of made up along the way. But we actually had it this week, and my 7-year-old son's screaming, pate, pate, pate. And there was something else that said you can have pate or you can have, I don't remember what it was, but it was like pate. So, so we started him young, and he enjoys it.
Now, what do you eat? I mean, you just.
The pate, I'll just eat it plain. Whenever we made it this week, I made bread, and so I didn't eat bread. So I did not do it, but I did make bread for them to have, and so they spread it on there like cut it real thin,
Okay.
like a cracker kind of, toast it like a cracker, and then sometimes we'll mix it with rice, and it ends up being almost like a rice dressing,
Oh, okay.
almost like a boudin
No, okay.
without the
What's the sweet?
Sweetbread is we had this conversation last time. It's the pancreas. Is that did anybody?
I thought they were the brain.
I thought it was a brain, but then I was told it wasn't.
Okay. I was gonna say, this brings up a good point that I was gonna make in that throughout this, I kind of started to realize, I think that without, like subconsciously, not every meal is for the purpose of my pure enjoyment. There are some meals, I was trying to explain to the kids why we were eating certain things, and there's some things that you eat because you know they're good for you, and when I meal plan, I try to make sure that if I have something that I know I'm consuming for the sake of it's good for me, that then the next meal that I have is something that's a little more of what I like. So I think oftentimes we get caught in that situation where I know I do, where like every meal needs to be something that's like over the moon, over the top, my favorite thing. And so that was a very different adjustment for me to realize sometimes this is good for me and it might not be my favorite thing to eat, but I can eat it and it's going to be a good thing.
Very good point. Okay, so our fatty fish. Anybody else have something to say about organs? I'll tell you, the first cow that we got slaughtered, they gave us all of the
Debris.
innards, yeah, the debris. And so I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, and I knew what was going to be in there, and I'd had it all before, but I just hadn't had it all in one big bag, you know. So we got home, and me and my husband, we were all excited, and we got home.